The rain poured mercilessly, drumming against the roof of the sleek black car as it rolled to a stop on a desolate dirt road. The headlights carved out a narrow tunnel of visibility in the relentless downpour, revealing nothing but dense trees and shifting shadows. Inside the car, Andrew Sullivan sat gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. His expensive suit was slightly wrinkled, the only sign of hesitation in his otherwise perfect appearance. Beside him was a small boy, Noah, barely 8 years old. The child blinked up at his father with wide, trusting eyes. "Where are we, Daddy?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. Andrew inhaled sharply but didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the door handle and stepped out, the cold rain immediately soaking his clothes. He moved to the passenger side, opened the door, and unbuckled Noah with mechanical precision. "Come on," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Noah hesitated, sensing something was wrong. His small hands clutched the fabric of his father's sleeve. "I don't like this place," he whispered. "Can we go home?" Andrew peeled the boy's fingers away, lifting him out of the car and setting him down onto the wet ground. The child wobbled slightly, the cold seeping through his thin clothes. "Daddy?" Noah's voice trembled now. "Why aren't you holding my hand?" Andrew took a step back, then another. The rain blurred his vision. Or maybe it was something else, something he refused to acknowledge. His lips pressed into a thin line as he turned on his heel and walked back to the car. "Daddy, wait!" Noah stumbled forward, his tiny feet splashing in the mud. "Don't leave me here, please." The car door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. Through the windshield, Andrew saw the child standing alone in the storm, his small frame shaking with cold and fear. For a moment, just a moment, something inside Andrew wavered. But then he clenched his jaw, forced himself to look away, and stepped on the accelerator. The car disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the sound of rain and a child's desperate cries. Alone in the forest, Noah shivered, his mind too young to fully comprehend what had just happened. All he knew was that his father, his only family, had abandoned him. And he was completely alone. The cold seeped into Noah's bones as the rain continued to pour, drenching his thin clothes. He hugged himself, trying to stop the shivering. But it was useless. His small fingers were numb. His feet caked in mud. His father was gone. The realization settled deep into his chest, a weight heavier than the storm itself. He stood frozen, staring at the empty road where the car had disappeared, hoping, praying, that maybe it would come back. But it never did. The forest around him was alive with the sounds of the night, distant howls, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. Each sound sent a shiver down his spine. The darkness was vast, swallowing him whole. Noah took a shaky step forward. He didn't know where he was going, but standing still felt worse. His tiny feet squelched against the wet earth as he moved deeper into the unknown. Minutes stretched into an eternity. His stomach ached from hunger. His throat burned from thirst. The cold gnawed at his body. But he kept walking. He had to find shelter. Then, he saw it. A flickering light, barely visible through the trees. Hope flared in his chest. Maybe someone was there. Maybe they could help. Forgetting his fear, Noah stumbled toward the light, his legs weak but determined. Branches scratched his arms. Thorns tugged at his clothes. But he pushed forward until he reached a small wooden cabin nestled in the trees. The light came from a lantern hanging by the door. The warm glow was a stark contrast to the cold, merciless night. Noah hesitated. What if whoever lived inside was dangerous? But he had no choice. Lifting a trembling hand, he knocked on the door. Silence. He knocked again, this time a little harder. The door creaked open. A tall man stood in the doorway, his face partially hidden in the shadows. His eyes, sharp and calculating, landed on the soaked, shivering child before him. Noah opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was too cold, too scared. The man studied him for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in," he said, his voice deep and unreadable. Noah hesitated, then stepped inside. The door shut behind him with a quiet click. And just like that, Noah's fate changed forever. The inside of the cabin was dimly lit, the flickering lantern casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The air smelled of damp wood and something Noah couldn't quite place, something earthy, like dried herbs. The man led Noah further inside without a word. His heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor, each step sending a shiver through the boy's spine. Noah hesitated near the entrance, unsure if he had just walked into safety or a new danger. "Sit," the man finally spoke, pointing to a worn-out chair by the fireplace. His voice was rough, unused to kindness. Noah obeyed, his legs too weak to stand any longer. He collapsed into the chair, his body aching from the cold. The warmth of the fire licked at his frozen skin, bringing back sensation in painful tingles. The man stood by the kitchen counter, pouring something into a tin cup. After a moment, he handed it to Noah. "Drink." Noah peered into the cup. A dark, steaming liquid filled it. He hesitated, but the heat radiating from it was too inviting. He took a small sip. The taste was bitter and unfamiliar, but warmth spread through his chest instantly. "What's your name?" the man asked. Noah hesitated. His father had warned him never to trust strangers, but his father had also abandoned him. "Noah," he finally whispered. The man nodded, watching him closely. "You're lucky I found you. A child alone in this forest? Wouldn't have lasted the night." Noah lowered his gaze. He didn't want to think about what could have happened. The man pulled up a chair across from him and leaned forward. "Who left you here?" Noah clenched his fists. His mind flashed back to his father's cold stare, the way he had driven away without looking back. "No one," he lied. The man's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, as if he could see through the lie. But instead of pressing, he simply leaned back in his chair. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." Noah didn't argue. His exhaustion was too heavy. He curled up in the chair, letting the fire's warmth lull him into sleep. For the first time that night, he felt safe. But safety, he would soon learn, was only an illusion. Noah woke to the sound of something scraping against the cabin wall. His body tensed. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The warmth of the fire had died down, leaving only faint embers glowing in the hearth. He sat up, his breath visible in the cold air. The man, his mysterious savior, was nowhere to be seen. The cabin felt eerily silent, save for the strange scratching sound outside. Slowly, Noah slid off the chair, careful not to make a noise. He tiptoed to the small window and peeked outside. The forest was still wrapped in a misty darkness, but he could make out a shadow moving along the edge of the trees. His heart pounded. Was it an animal, or something worse? Before he could decide what to do, the cabin door creaked open. Noah whirled around, his pulse racing. The man stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. "You're up," he said, his voice as gruff as ever. Noah nodded, trying to steady his breathing. "I heard something outside." The man's expression darkened. He moved to the window, scanning the tree line. "You weren't followed, were you?" The question sent a chill through Noah that had nothing to do with the cold. "Followed? By who?" "No," he whispered. "I don't think so." The man didn't look convinced. He strode to the fireplace and threw more wood onto the embers, sending sparks into the air. "You're staying here for now," he said firmly. "Don't go outside. Don't open the door for anyone." Noah frowned. "Why? What's out there?" The man met his gaze, something unreadable in his eyes. "Trouble," he said simply. Noah swallowed hard. For the first time, he wondered if escaping the storm had only led him into something far more dangerous. Noah couldn't sleep. The man's words echoed in his mind. Trouble? What kind of trouble? Was someone after him? Or was it something else? Lying on the old wooden cot, Noah stared at the ceiling, listening to the crackling fire. The warmth should have been comforting, but instead, unease wrapped around him like a second skin. The man, his mysterious savior, hadn't said much since their brief exchange. He simply sat in the corner, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Noah swallowed. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't look up. He kept sharpening the blade, the soft shhhk of metal against stone filling the silence. After a long pause, he said, "Someone who shouldn't be here." Noah frowned. "What does that mean?" The man exhaled heavily. Setting the knife down, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It means I have my own reasons for staying in this cabin," he said, eyes dark and unreadable. "And you've just made things more complicated." Noah bristled. "I didn't ask to be here." The man smirked, but there was no humor in it. And yet, here you are." Before Noah could respond, a sudden thud outside made both of them freeze. The man moved first, grabbing his knife and rising to his feet. He gestured for Noah to stay put as he crept toward the door. Noah's breath hitched. The wind howled outside, rattling the old wooden walls. But beneath the storm's wail, there was something else, a faint scraping sound. Just like before, Noah's pulse thundered in his ears. Then, 3 loud knocks echoed through the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. The man didn't move. He gripped the knife tighter. Noah barely breathed. A voice, low and hoarse, spoke from the other side. "Let me in." The fire crackled, the wind howled, and Noah knew, with bone-deep certainty, that whoever was outside wasn't human. Noah clutched the blanket tightly, his entire body rigid. The voice outside had been eerily calm, but something about it made his skin crawl. The man at the door remained still, knife glinting in the firelight. "Who's there?" he asked. Voice low and firm. Silence. Then, another knock, slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. Noah felt the air in the cabin grow colder, as if the fire had lost its warmth. A different voice spoke this time, softer. Familiar. "Please, let me in." Noah's breath hitched. His blood turned to ice. That was his mother's voice. But it couldn't be. His mother was dead. He turned to the man, eyes wide with terror. The man didn't move, didn't react. His grip on the knife tightened, knuckles white. "No," the man said flatly. A pause. Then, the voice outside shifted, warping into something unnatural. "You're making a mistake." The last word stretched, distorted, as if spoken by multiple voices at once. The walls of the cabin creaked under some unseen force. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the door. Noah squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his hands over his ears. He wanted to block it out, but the voice seemed to crawl under his skin. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. No wind, no knocking, just an eerie, suffocating stillness. Noah hesitantly opened his eyes. The man was still at the door, shoulders tense. After a long moment, he exhaled and stepped back. "It's gone." Noah swallowed hard. "What was that?" The man turned, his dark eyes meeting Noah's. "Something that wants you dead." Noah's fingers trembled as he loosened his grip on the blanket. His mind raced, searching for an explanation. A cruel prank? A trick of the wind? He didn't want to believe what he had just heard. The man at the door remained motionless, listening. His knife was steady, his breathing slow and controlled. Then, a soft scraping sound against the wood. Not a knock this time. Something, or someone, was dragging their fingers down the door. Noah felt his pulse hammering in his ears. The man finally moved, stepping away from the door and motioning for Noah to stay quiet. He crossed the cabin in 3 long strides, dousing the fire with a heavy blanket. The room plunged into near darkness, the only light coming from the faint moonlight seeping through the wooden slats. Noah's breath hitched as the man approached him. He crouched down, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Listen to me," the man said. "We're not alone out here." Noah swallowed hard, his throat dry. Who was that?" The man's expression was grim. "I don't know yet, but I do know this. They want you to open that door. And you must not do that. Ever." A chill ran down Noah's spine. Outside, the dragging sound stopped. Then, nothing. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Noah could barely breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the man exhaled, standing up slowly. He moved toward the window, pressing his back against the wall before tilting his head just enough to peek outside. He was completely still for several seconds. Then, he cursed under his breath. Noah couldn't take it anymore. What do you see?" The man turned back, eyes hard. "There's someone standing by the tree line, watching us." Noah's stomach twisted. "They haven't moved," the man continued, "but they will." Noah felt sick. "What do we do?" The man's jaw tightened. "We wait. We don't open that door. We don't make a sound. And we prepare for the worst." Noah didn't know what was worse. The thought of whoever was outside waiting for them, or the fact that the man seemed to know exactly what was coming next. Noah's breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to steady himself. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, making it hard to think clearly. His fingers clenched around the rough fabric of the blanket, but it offered no comfort. The man remained by the window, unmoving. He was watching, waiting. Noah's mind raced. Who was out there? What did they want? If they were just a lost traveler, wouldn't they have spoken up normally? A deep unease settled in his gut. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps crunching through the dried leaves outside. Whoever it was, they were moving closer. The man's grip on his knife tightened. His breathing remained calm, controlled, like this wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this. Noah felt his stomach churn. Then, the footsteps stopped, right outside the door. A pause. Then, the doorknob rattled. Noah's blood ran cold. He barely managed to stifle a gasp as his heart pounded violently against his ribs. The man didn't react, at least. Not visibly. But Noah could see his muscles tensing. Coiled like a spring. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. Whoever was outside, they weren't knocking anymore. They were trying to get in. Noah turned to the man, barely whispering, "What do we do?" The man didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the door. "We wait." Noah swallowed. Another rattling of the knob. Then, silence. For a long, agonizing moment, the only thing Noah could hear was his own breathing. The wind had died down. Even the usual sounds of the forest had vanished. Then, something slid under the door. A folded piece of paper. Noah's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at it. The man hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. Knife still raised, and crouched down. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. His expression darkened as his eyes scanned the message. Noah leaned forward, desperate to see. "What does it say?" The man's jaw clenched. 3 words were scrawled in messy, uneven handwriting. "Let him out." Noah's throat felt dry. He wanted to ask what the man meant, but the tension in the air made him hesitate. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. The man clenched the crumpled piece of paper in his fist before tossing it into the flames. The paper curled, darkened, and turned to ash. "They know you're here," he finally said, his voice firm and quiet. Noah felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Who?" The man turned toward the door, his grip on the knife tightening. "People looking for you, or more specifically, people looking to use you." Noah swallowed hard. "Use me?" The man's expression darkened. "Your father had enemies, dangerous ones. If they know you're here, they'll do whatever it takes to get to you." A cold weight settled in Noah's stomach. He had heard bits and pieces about his father's work, something about business deals gone wrong. Old debts left unsettled, but his father had never spoken about enemies. Noah clenched his fists. "Why now?" The man shook his head. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to get out of here." Then, a knock at the door. Noah flinched. The sound was softer this time, almost patient. Then a voice, calm and controlled. "Noah, we know you're in there." His pulse pounded. His name. They knew his name. The man at the door didn't react, his grip on the knife steady. But Noah saw his other hand slowly move toward the rifle resting against the wall. "Listen, kid," the man said under his breath. "We don't open that door. We don't talk to them. We get out, and we get out fast." Another knock. Then the same voice, more insistent. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The man gave Noah a sharp look. "Get your boots on, now." Noah didn't argue. His hands shook as he pulled on his boots. His mind racing. Who were these people? And how far would they go to take him? Noah barely had time to pull on his boots before the man moved. He grabbed a backpack from under the bed, slinging it over his shoulder, and then reached for the rifle. "Stay close," he ordered, voice low but firm. Noah's heart pounded as he followed him toward the back of the cabin. There was no back door, only a small window. The man grabbed a chair, pushed it against the wall, and pointed at the window. "Climb through. Move fast." Noah hesitated. The knocking at the front door had stopped. The silence was worse. What if they're waiting outside? The man's jaw tightened. "They're expecting us to hesitate. That's why we don't." Noah swallowed hard and climbed onto the chair. He pushed the window open, feeling the sting of the cold air against his face. The darkness outside stretched endlessly. No signs of movement, yet. He swung one leg over the windowsill, then the other, landing softly on the damp ground. The man followed right after, pulling the window shut behind them. Then, footsteps, heavy boots crunching against the forest floor. Close, too close. The man grabbed Noah by the shoulder and pulled him behind a stack of firewood. He crouched low, keeping his body between Noah and the approaching figures. "We spread out," a voice said in the darkness. "Deep. Controlled. He's got the kid with him." A second voice, quieter but sharp. "He won't get far." Noah's chest tightened. He tried to control his breathing, to stay still, but every muscle in his body screamed to run. The man beside him slowly, carefully, shifted the rifle into position. Then a beam of light cut through the trees. A flashlight. It swept across the clearing, missing them by inches. The man didn't move, didn't even breathe. The voices grew fainter as the men spread out, moving deeper into the woods. Noah barely had time to exhale before the man nudged him forward. "Now," he whispered, "we run." And they did. Noah's legs burned as he sprinted through the underbrush, dodging low branches and leaping over exposed roots. The man ran ahead, moving like he had done this 100 times before, silent, efficient, purposeful. Behind them, the voices of the men spread out, their footsteps crashing through the forest. Noah's breath came in ragged gasps. He wasn't used to this. His limbs felt heavy, his lungs ached, but he forced himself to keep going. The man never looked back, but he knew Noah was still behind him. He could hear the boy's breathing, hear his feet hitting the ground. Then, suddenly, the man veered left. Noah barely managed to follow before he saw what they were running toward, a small creek, its water dark under the moonlight. The man didn't slow down. "Jump," he ordered. Noah hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to hear a sharp whistle cut through the air. A gunshot. Noah threw himself forward, landing in the freezing water with a splash. The cold stole the breath from his lungs. But the man was already pulling him up. "Move," he hissed. They waded across the creek as another shot rang out, this one hitting the water just behind them. The man reached the opposite bank first, grabbing a low-hanging branch and using it to pull himself up. Then, without missing a beat, he turned back and grabbed Noah's arm, yanking him up onto solid ground. A shout echoed from behind them. "They're crossing." Noah's chest heaved as he struggled to stand. The man pulled him up by the collar and forced him forward. No stopping. Noah didn't argue. He could hear the men splashing into the creek, their voices urgent, their weapons shifting. The chase wasn't over. Noah's legs trembled, but he forced himself to keep running. His body screamed for rest, but the man's grip on his collar was unrelenting, dragging him forward. They crashed through the undergrowth, pushing deeper into the forest. The gunfire had stopped, but the voices behind them hadn't. "They're heading east. Cut them off before the ridge." The man cursed under his breath. He glanced up, scanning the terrain ahead. Then, suddenly, he yanked Noah to the right, pulling him toward a cluster of jagged rocks partially covered by thick foliage. "Here," he whispered. "Get down." Noah barely had time to react before the man shoved him into the crevice between two boulders. The space was narrow, damp, the ground uneven beneath him. The man crouched beside him, his breathing steady despite the chase. Noah's own breaths were shallow and frantic. He could hear the footsteps getting closer. The men were moving fast, through the gaps in the leaves. Noah saw dark figures moving through the trees, their weapons raised. Where did they go? One of them snarled. Spread out. They couldn't have gone far. Noah swallowed hard, pressing himself against the cold stone. The man beside him was completely still, his grip firm on the handle of his knife. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Then, a rustling sound. Close. One of the men had stepped near their hiding spot. Noah clenched his fists, willing himself not to move, not to breathe too loudly. The man above them shifted, scanning the area. His boot scraped against the rock, so close that Noah could see the worn leather of it. The man beside Noah tensed, fingers tightening around his knife. Then, a whistle cut through the night. A different voice called out from a distance. "Tracks over here." The man near them hesitated, then turned away, heading toward the sound. Noah felt his entire body sag in relief. The man beside him waited a few more seconds, then leaned in close, whispering, "We move now." Quiet. Noah nodded, and together, they slipped deeper into the shadows. Noah followed the man through the dense undergrowth, his breath coming in quiet, controlled gasps. Every step had to be precise. One wrong move, one snapped twig, and the men hunting them would be back on their trail. The cold air stung his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had happened. His father was dead. These men had come for him. And the only reason he was still alive was the stranger leading him through the darkness. After several minutes of careful maneuvering, they reached a small clearing. The man halted, motioning for Noah to stay still. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes darting from tree to tree, assessing every shadow. Then, satisfied, he turned to Noah. "We can't stay here," he murmured. "They'll sweep the forest again soon." Noah swallowed hard. "Who are they? Why are they after me?" The man exhaled, glancing back toward the direction they had come from. "They're professionals, the kind that don't leave loose ends." His tone was grim. "They came to wipe out your father's entire operation." Noah's stomach twisted. He had always known his father wasn't exactly a law-abiding businessman. But this? Why kill him? He whispered. The man looked at him, his expression unreadable, because he was in the way. A shiver ran down Noah's spine. "What about me?" The man didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, "That depends." Noah's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to demand more. But another sound stopped him. A faint rustling. The man tensed, eyes flicking toward the tree line. He motioned for Noah to stay low. Noah's heart pounded as he crouched. The sound grew closer, steady footsteps. Methodical, not running, not searching, just moving with quiet confidence. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They knew exactly where they were going. The man's grip tightened around his knife. Then, a voice. "Come out, kid, we just want to talk." It was calm, almost friendly, but Noah wasn't fooled. The man beside him gave the slightest shake of his head. Noah didn't move. The voice continued. "You really want to trust him?" A chuckle. "You don't even know who he is." Noah's pulse hammered against his ribs. The man beside him remained silent, unmoving. Then, the voice spoke again, this time with an edge of amusement. "Your father begged, you know." Noah's breath caught. The man beside him stiffened, his grip tightening. The voice sighed, footsteps stopping just outside the clearing. "Fine, have it your way." A moment later, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked echoed through the trees. Noah didn't have time to think. The man lunged. The gunshot cracked through the forest like a whip. Noah flinched, his body instinctively freezing for a split second. But the man beside him was already moving. With a burst of speed, he lunged at Noah, pushing him down just as another shot whizzed past, tearing through the bark of a nearby tree. The man rolled, pulling Noah with him into the underbrush, using the terrain as cover. "Run," he hissed. Noah didn't hesitate. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, and followed the man as he weaved through the trees. The sound of boots crunching against fallen leaves filled the air. Whoever was after them wasn't alone. A third shot rang out, chipping off wood just inches from Noah's head. Ducking low, he forced himself to focus. Panic wouldn't help him now. He needed to think. The man ahead of him suddenly veered left, towards a rocky incline covered in thick vegetation. Without slowing down, he pulled something from his belt, a small, cylindrical object. A grenade? Before Noah could process it, the man yanked the pin and hurled it behind them. A deafening bang erupted, not an explosion but a blinding flash of white light. A flashbang. Shouts of confusion followed. The men chasing them stumbled, momentarily disoriented. Noah kept running, his legs burned, lungs screaming for air, but the man didn't slow down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they broke through the tree line. A river lay ahead, its surface glinting under the faint moonlight. The man stopped and turned to Noah. "We need to cross," he said, scanning the area. Noah hesitated. "What if they won't shoot into the water? Too risky. But if we stay here, we're dead." Noah swallowed hard and nodded. Without another word, they waded into the freezing current. The cold was a shock. But Noah gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The water was deeper than it looked. Soon, he was struggling to keep his head above the surface, the current pulling at his legs. The man grabbed his arm, keeping him steady. "Almost there," he said. Behind them, voices shouted in frustration. The men had reached the riverbank. A flashlight beam swept across the water. "Move," the man ordered. They kicked harder, reaching the opposite shore just as the first gunshot cracked again. But it was too late. The darkness swallowed them whole. They had escaped. For now. Noah collapsed onto the muddy shore, chest heaving, limbs trembling from exhaustion and cold. The water had sapped every ounce of strength from him. He wanted to lie there forever. But the man didn't give him that chance. "Get up," the man ordered, voice low but urgent. "They'll be searching the riverbanks. We need to move." Noah forced himself onto his hands and knees, coughing up water. His muscles ached, but the fear of being caught was stronger than his fatigue. The man helped him up and pointed toward the dense trees ahead. "There's an old hunting cabin a few miles from here. If we make it before sunrise, we can rest and plan our next move." Noah nodded weakly and stumbled forward. His legs felt like lead, but he pushed on. Every few minutes, the man would glance behind them, eyes scanning for movement. The forest was eerily silent except for the sound of their footsteps squelching through the wet earth. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a steep hill covered in thick vegetation. The man slowed and motioned for Noah to follow him up. They climbed in silence, careful not to disturb the loose rocks beneath their feet. At the top, the man crouched low and scanned the landscape. Below them, faint beams of flashlights flickered along the riverbank. Their pursuers were still searching. "We bought ourselves some time. But not much," the man murmured. Noah's breath was still ragged, but his mind was clearer now. He turned to the man. "Who are they? Why are they after us?" The man exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. "They're professionals, not just criminals, kidnappers, traffickers, the kind of people who make problems disappear. And right now, you're their problem." Noah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Why me?" The man hesitated. "Because of who your father was." Noah's stomach twisted. He had known his father wasn't a good man. But this? The man didn't elaborate. Instead, he stood and nodded toward the trees. "Come on, we're not safe yet." Noah followed the man deeper into the forest, his mind racing with questions. His father was dead. What could he have done to put Noah in danger even after his death? The trees thickened around them, casting heavy shadows in the moonlight. The night air was sharp and damp, clinging to their clothes. Noah's legs ached, but he forced himself to keep going. "How do you know them?" Noah finally asked, his voice hushed. The man didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, stepping carefully over tangled roots and fallen branches. Finally, he spoke. "I used to work for them." Noah's breath hitched. "What?" The man glanced at him briefly before continuing. "Not as one of them. I was hired to track people down. Retrieve them. I didn't ask questions. But then I learned the truth about what happened to those people after I found them." His jaw tightened. "I tried to get out. They don't let people walk away." Noah absorbed the words, the weight of them pressing against his chest. "And now? Now, I make sure they don't get what they want." Noah fell silent, digesting the information. This man wasn't just helping him out of kindness. He had his own reasons to fight. But could Noah trust him? A sudden snap of a branch made them both freeze. The man held up a hand, signaling for Noah to stay still. He drew a small pistol from his jacket, scanning the darkness. Noah held his breath, ears straining. The sound had come from somewhere to their left. Then, footsteps. Slow, careful. Someone was trying to move quietly. The man gestured toward a thicket of bushes. "Hide, now." Noah hesitated. "Go," the man hissed. Noah ducked into the undergrowth, crouching low, through the gaps in the leaves. He saw the man raise his gun. Then, a voice called out, "Noah, we just want to talk." Noah's blood turned cold. It was a woman's voice. Calm, almost soothing. "We know you're scared," she continued, "but we can explain everything. There's no need to run." Noah clenched his jaw. Every instinct screamed at him not to believe her. The man didn't move, didn't answer. The woman sighed. "Fine, have it your way." A single gunshot shattered the silence. The gunshot echoed through the trees. Noah flinched, heart hammering in his chest. From his hiding spot, he could see the man standing his ground, gun raised. The woman didn't scream, didn't even react. Instead, there was a slow rustling sound, like someone moving deliberately through the underbrush. Then, her voice came again, calm as ever. That was unnecessary. A flicker of movement to the left, then to the right. More of them. They weren't alone. The man tensed, shifting his stance. He kept his gun steady but didn't fire again. His breath was slow, controlled. "Noah," he called, his voice low but firm. "When I say run, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back." Noah clenched his fists. His entire body screamed at him to bolt now. But he forced himself to wait. A shadow moved between the trees. Then another. "Surround them," the woman ordered. Noah's pulse pounded. He counted at least 3 figures moving through the darkness. Maybe more. The man exhaled sharply. "Run!" Noah exploded from his hiding place. Sprinting into the trees. Branches tore at his clothes. His arms. But he didn't stop. Behind him, he heard the sharp crack of another gunshot, then a shout. Followed by rapid footsteps. They were chasing him. Noah ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold air stung his throat. But he couldn't slow down. The forest was dense, branches slapping at his face and arms. But he pushed forward. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They were fast. Too fast. A sharp whistle cut through the night. It wasn't random, this was a signal. Noah's heart pounded harder. They were communicating, coordinating. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Shadows moved between the trees. Figures in dark clothing blending into the forest. They were spreading out, trying to cut him off. His foot caught on a root. He fell hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Dirt filled his mouth, and his palms burned from the rough ground. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to roll onto his side, pushing up just as he heard the footsteps closing in. A dark figure loomed over him. Noah didn't think, he kicked out, his foot connecting with the man's knee. The attacker grunted, staggering back. Noah scrambled to his feet and ran. A voice called out, "Get him!" Branches snapped behind him. Then, another gunshot. Noah flinched, expecting to feel pain, but the shot wasn't aimed at him. One of the figures pursuing him crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across their chest. From the distance, the man, his protector, was still fighting. "Noah, this way!" His voice rang out. Noah veered left, sprinting toward the sound. More gunshots echoed through the trees. He had no idea if they were friend or foe. But he didn't stop. The forest began to thin. Up ahead, he saw the edge of a dirt road. Then, a pair of headlights appeared. A black SUV skidded to a stop. Doors flying open. More men, armed, trapped. Noah skidded to a stop, his mind racing. The SUV doors slammed open, and 3 men stepped out. Their movements were precise, trained. They carried rifles, their eyes scanning the trees. Behind him, the footsteps of his pursuers grew louder. He was trapped between 2 groups. Then, another gunshot. One of the men near the SUV staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The others reacted instantly, raising their weapons toward the trees. A deep voice barked an order. "Cover him." The man who had protected Noah burst from the tree line, moving fast. His pistol was up, aimed at the men by the SUV. He fired twice. One shot hit the side mirror. The other forced the men to take cover. Noah didn't need to be told twice. He ran toward his protector. But the men near the SUV weren't retreating. One of them spoke into a radio. "Target secured. Move in." From deeper in the forest, more figures emerged. More of them. Noah's stomach twisted. There were too many. The man beside him cursed. "We need to move. Now." They darted into the trees. The gunfire erupted again. Bullets splintered branches, kicking up dirt and leaves. Noah ducked low, his legs burning from exertion. Ahead, the terrain sloped downward. The man grabbed his arm. "Slide down." Noah barely had time to process before they were tumbling down the incline. The cold earth scraped against his skin. But they gained distance. When they finally stopped, Noah gasped for air. The man yanked him to his feet. His face was grim. "They won't stop coming." Noah's hands trembled. "Who are they?" The man's jaw tightened. "People who want you for leverage. We can't let them take you." The sound of engines roared in the distance. More SUVs. They had to keep running. They had to find a way to escape before it was too late. Noah and the man ran deeper into the forest, following a narrow stream to hide their tracks. The sound of engines behind them grew louder. "We can't keep running forever," the man said urgently. "We need another way." Noah forced himself to stay calm, scanning the surroundings for anything useful. Ahead, he spotted an old wooden bridge. "Cross the bridge and break it," Noah shouted. They sprinted across the rickety planks. The man pulled out a knife and slashed at the main support ropes. The wood groaned, then snapped. Within moments, the bridge collapsed into the rushing stream below. On the other side, their pursuers skidded to a halt. One of them cursed into his radio. Noah panted, turning to the man. "Now what?" Now we get out of this forest before they find another way across." They took off running again, knowing they had little time left. Noah's legs burned as they ran, his breath coming in short gasps. The forest was dense, the uneven ground threatening to trip them at every step. The man moved with precision, barely making a sound. Noah did his best to follow his lead. Behind them, the distant voices of their pursuers grew fainter. But they knew the chase wasn't over. "We need to get off this trail," the man said, scanning the trees. "They'll have drones. If we stay in the open, they'll find us." Noah's heart pounded. Drones. That meant these men had serious resources. "Where do we go?" Noah asked. The man hesitated for only a second before nodding towards a rocky incline ahead. "Up there. They won't expect us to climb." Noah groaned but followed. His fingers slipped against the cold stone. But the man reached down, gripping his wrist and pulling him up. Inch by inch, they scaled the rocks, their bodies pressed low to stay out of sight. Just as they reached the top, the sound of a drone's buzzing cut through the night air. "Stay still," the man whispered. Noah held his breath as the small aircraft hovered nearby, its searchlight sweeping the ground below. They pressed themselves into the shadows, praying the darkness would keep them hidden. The drone lingered for a few seconds, then drifted away. "We can't stay here," the man murmured. "Let's move." They climbed down the other side of the ridge, their bodies tense. Somewhere ahead, they had to find shelter. They had to find a way out. Because Noah knew one thing for certain: these men wouldn't stop until they had him. Noah's legs ached, his breath shallow as he followed the man deeper into the wilderness. The forest stretched endlessly before them, an unforgiving maze of towering trees and thick underbrush. Every step was a risk. One wrong move could send them tumbling down the steep slopes or alert their pursuers. "We can't keep running forever," Noah whispered between gasps. "They'll find us eventually." The man's expression remained unreadable, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Then, as if deciding something, he veered left, guiding Noah toward a fallen tree. He knelt and brushed aside the damp leaves, revealing a narrow tunnel leading underground. "Get in." Noah hesitated. The entrance was barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, and the darkness inside was suffocating. "They won't find us here," the man urged. "Move." With no other choice, Noah crawled into the tunnel. The air was damp, thick with the scent of soil and decay. He could hear the man sliding in behind him, then pulling branches over the entrance to conceal it. They moved in silence, inching forward through the narrow passage until it widened into a small underground chamber. Wooden beams lined the dirt walls, supporting what looked like an old hideout. A few rusty lanterns and empty crates were scattered around. "What is this place?" Noah asked. "An old smuggler's tunnel, probably abandoned for decades," the man replied, checking the walls for stability. "But it'll keep us safe for now." Noah slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. His heart still pounded, but for the first time that night, they had a moment to breathe. "We wait here until morning," the man decided. "Then, we find a way out of this mess." Noah exhaled shakily, nodding. For now, they were safe. Noah barely slept. The cold dirt beneath him and the lingering fear kept his body tense, his mind racing. The man, however, sat calmly against the wall, his knife resting on his knee, eyes half closed but alert. As dawn approached, the man finally spoke. "It's time to move." Noah stood, stretching his stiff limbs. "Where are we going?" "There's an old road a few miles west. If we can reach it without being seen, we'll have a chance." Without wasting time, they climbed out of the tunnel and into the dim morning light. The forest was eerily quiet, but Noah felt exposed. The night had masked their movements. Daylight was far less forgiving. They moved carefully, staying low and avoiding open spaces. Hours passed, their progress slow but steady. Just when Noah started to believe they might make it, the man suddenly raised a hand. "Down," he whispered. Noah dropped behind a fallen tree, holding his breath. Up ahead, a group of men stood at the edge of a clearing. They were armed, scanning the forest with sharp, practiced eyes. One of them spoke into a radio, his voice low and urgent. "They're still looking for us," Noah whispered. The man's jaw tightened. "Then we don't have much time." He scanned the terrain before turning to Noah. "Listen carefully. I'll draw them away. You keep going west. Stay low. Move fast. And don't stop until you find the road." Noah's heart pounded. "What? No, I can't." "You can," the man cut in, "and you will." Before Noah could argue, the man was already moving. He stepped out, throwing a rock deep into the woods. The noise drew the men's attention instantly. "There, over there," one of them shouted, raising his weapon. The group rushed toward the sound. Noah hesitated only a second before doing exactly as he was told, running west. His legs burned, his lungs screamed for air. But he didn't stop. He weaved through the trees, barely glancing back. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, through the trees, he saw it, a narrow, cracked road stretching into the distance. A car approached, not knowing if it was friend or foe. Noah staggered to the middle of the road, waving desperately. The vehicle screeched to a halt. A woman inside rolled down the window, eyes wide with confusion and concern. "Are you okay? What happened?" Noah gasped for breath. "Please, help me." The woman hesitated only for a moment before unlocking the door. "Get in." Noah didn't think twice. He climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. As they sped away, he glanced back at the forest, searching for any sign of the man. But he was gone, and Noah was finally free. Noah sat in the car, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. The woman glanced at him, concern in her eyes. "You're safe now," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I need to know, who are you running from?" Noah hesitated. He wasn't sure how much he could trust her, but he had no choice. "Men," he finally said. "They took me. I don't know why." The woman frowned, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Kidnappers?" Noah nodded. She exhaled sharply. "We need to get you to the police." Noah panicked. "No, they could be watching. They could have people there." The woman pursed her lips, thinking, "All right, we'll go somewhere safe first." She pressed the gas pedal, the car speeding down the road. Noah tried to calm his nerves, but his mind kept racing. Who was this woman? Why was she helping him? Minutes turned into an hour. The car eventually pulled up to a small gas station on the outskirts of a quiet town. The woman parked and turned to him. "My name is Sarah," she said, "and I think you should tell me everything." Noah swallowed hard, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Then, he started talking. Noah hesitated for a moment before speaking. His voice was barely above a whisper as he recounted everything: how he was taken, how he escaped, and the man who had protected him in the cabin. Sarah listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. "All right," she said, "I don't know who these people are. But if they have the kind of power to reach the police, then taking you there isn't an option." Noah's stomach clenched. "So what do we do?" Sarah was silent for a moment, then turned the key in the ignition. "We disappear." 2 days later, they arrived at a remote countryside town, far from the city. The roads were lined with old farmhouses, and the air smelled of fresh grass and wood smoke. Sarah parked in front of a modest house with a wooden fence and a large oak tree in the front yard. "This is home now," she said. Inside, the house was simple but cozy. A fireplace crackled in the corner, and a few framed pictures hung on the walls. Sarah motioned for Noah to sit. "I can't risk them finding you," she said. "From now on, your name is Nathan Cole. You're my nephew, and you've come to live with me after your parents died in an accident. Understood?" Noah, now Nathan, nodded slowly. "What about my papers?" Sarah pulled out a small box. Inside were forged documents, birth certificate, school records, even a new passport. "It's not perfect," she admitted, "but it's enough to keep you safe." Nathan stared at the papers, his old life slipping further away. He knew this was his only chance to start over. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You have a second chance, Nathan. Make the most of it." And just like that, Noah ceased to exist. Nathan adjusted slowly to his new life in the countryside. The first few weeks were difficult. He constantly looked over his shoulder, afraid that someone would come for him. But as time passed, the quiet routine of the small town began to settle into his bones. Sarah enrolled him in the local school under his new identity. The teachers were kind, the students mostly kept to themselves. And for the first time in a long while, Nathan felt like he could breathe. But the nightmares didn't stop. Almost every night, he dreamt of the dark forest, the cold cabin, and the man who had protected him. Sometimes, he saw the shadowed figures outside the door, knocking, whispering. He would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. One night, Sarah heard him screaming and rushed into his room. She sat beside him as he struggled to catch his breath. "It's over," she said softly, brushing his damp hair from his forehead. "You're safe now." Nathan wanted to believe her. Months passed, and he started blending in. He made a few friends at school, learned how to help Sarah around the house, and even picked up a part-time job at a small mechanics shop on the weekends. But deep down, he knew the past wasn't done with him. One evening, as he was closing up the shop, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It hadn't been there when he arrived. The windows were tinted, the engine still running. Nathan felt his stomach twist. He forced himself to walk home as if nothing was wrong. But his mind raced. Was it them? Had they found him? That night, he told Sarah. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable. "We'll keep watch," she said finally. "But we don't run unless we have to." Nathan barely slept, his mind filled with the image of the black SUV. The next morning, it was gone. But he knew, this wasn't over. Years passed, and Nathan slowly built a new life under a different identity. He lived in a quiet town, working at a small repair shop, trying to move forward. The memories of that night, of the man who had saved him, never truly left his mind. That man, David, had taken him in when no one else would. He had risked everything to protect Nathan, knowing full well the danger it would bring. One evening, Nathan sat at the local cafe, flipping through an old newspaper when a small headline caught his eye. "Unidentified body found in remote cabin, suspected criminal activity." His heart pounded. The details were scarce, but he recognized the location immediately. It was the cabin. The article mentioned a middle-aged man, cause of death unclear, and no known relatives. Nathan clenched his fists. He knew exactly what had happened. The people chasing him had never stopped looking. They had found David. Later that night, he sat alone, staring at the flickering light in his apartment. Guilt pressed heavily on his chest. David had given everything to save him, and in the end, he had paid the price. But Nathan knew mourning wouldn't change anything. David had once told him, "If you survive, make it mean something." So Nathan stood up, determined. He wouldn't let David's sacrifice be in vain. He would stop running, not just for himself, but for the man who had given him a second chance. Years passed, and Nathan no longer lived in fear. He had built a life for himself, one that honored David's sacrifice. He took on a new name, a new career, and eventually started helping others who, like him, had once been lost. David's past remained a mystery, but Nathan made sure he was never forgotten. He placed a small gravestone in a quiet field, marking the man who had saved him. No one else knew the story, but to Nathan, it was enough. One evening, as he locked up his small workshop, he looked up at the darkening sky. He had spent years running, hiding, trying to escape his past. But now, for the first time, he felt at peace. David had saved him, not just from the men hunting him, but from becoming someone consumed by fear. And Nathan would honor that by living, not in the shadows, but in the light. With a deep breath, he walked home. The past would always be with him, but it no longer controlled him. He was finally free. And so, Nathan's journey came to an end, not with fear or regret, but with hope and strength. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had built a new life, one that honored those who had sacrificed for him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more incredible stories with you. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.